Good afternoon, students. So this video is made for the absolute beginners of people who have never written a poem or who feel intimidated by either reading a poem or writing a poem. And so I want to encourage you to, in this class, we're going to do a poetry unit in weeks 5 and 6. And so we're going to be reading poetry from the greatest poets. And what I'd like you to do is, and this is outside of class, totally voluntary, is that in your writing journals, after you read your favorite poem, you should try to sit down and try to write your own poem and see how you like it. Remember that a poem is simply a passage written in a formalized way that expresses your thoughts, your emotions. And when you write poetry, you could write about nature, you could write about your emotions, and you can use the poems that we read in this class as kind of like templates for your own poetry. And I'm going to give a lecture, and I base this lecture off of WikiHow. That's how beginning this is. So if you've already written poetry or you're already a published poet, you can skip over this video right away. But if you've never read a poem or you feel intimidated by poetry, then by all means, I welcome you to watch this WikiHow video, because that's where I got it from, WikiHow. And I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope that this video inspires you to write a poem in your reader response journal. And this is outside of the class, not for a grade. Let's see if I could get this thing to work. There we go. So when we write a poem and we want to think, so what topic do I want to write about? What turns me on? And just like when you write an essay, you have the writing process. And so you can do the pre-writing activity known as free writing, in which you just sit down, you open your reader response journal, and you just free write whatever comes to your mind. You free write, or you can brainstorm. You could draw those circles like here, where you write the main idea, and then you write the description. For instance, in this poem, her eyes. How beautiful her eyes are. Her eyes are blue, green, and gray. Her eyes are clear, deep as the ocean. Her eyes make me feel calm and safe. And most of all, her eyes make me feel loved. And so here is a poem all about the eyes of the loved one. Or you can free write, lost in my mind, I am swarmed by my thoughts, incessant thoughts spinning around me like a tornado of worry and doubt, bumping me left, right, up and down. I dream of mind as peaceful as a meadow. And so when we write a poem, we write a poem for it to be read out loud. And in ancient times, poems were written to be sung and to be set to music. So the most ancient poems were actually, lyrics for the most ancient songs in ancient societies. And so all cultures have poems, just different kinds. So to start out, you would think to yourself, what am I interested in? Who do I love? What do I want to describe? How do I feel? Because we write poems about emotion, about nature, about the people we love. And then there's many among other topics. So the hardest part is actually getting yourself to sit down and think to yourself, I can do this. I can write that poem. It's not that hard. With kids, they think of it as a game. You give them a template, and then they think it's a game of rhyming words. That's how kids get into writing poetry. It's a game to them. But for adults, it has to have more meaning. So think about a person you truly love. And let's start out with something simple, just like this example. Think about the person you love, and what do their eyes make you feel? And you could use this exact template for your very first poem, just to be on the safe side. Okay, so let's get into, so the very first step in starting a poem is free write. Think about freely your thoughts and write down without any regard to grammar what your poem will be about, just like when you do with your essays. Okay, so we're still in the pre-writing stage of writing a poem. Yes, your old and standby of writing process of pre-writing, writing, and rewriting from your English 101 rears its ugly head again and again, because no matter what you write, whether it's a business letter or poetry or your essay, you are going to be using that old standby, the writing process. So right now, another activity for pre-writing, brainstorm ideas. Do writing exercises. A poem might start as a snippet or a verse, a line or two that seems to come out of nowhere, an image you cannot get out of your head. You can find inspiration for your poem by doing writing exercises and using the world around you as inspiration. Once you have inspiration, you can then shape and mold your thoughts into a poem. So try a free write. Grab a notebook or your computer and just start writing about your day, your feelings, or how you don't know what to write about. Let your mind wander for 5 to 10 minutes and see what you come up with. Write to a prompt. Look up poem prompts online or come up with your own. Look like what water feels like or how it feels to get bad news. Write down whatever comes to your mind and see where it takes you. I kind of like that first topic about eyes, and then you just expand on that. Make a list of mind maps or images. Think about a situation that's full of emotion for you and write down a list of images or ideas that you associate with it. So when you look into the eyes of someone you love, what images, what emotions does that evoke for you? With just that simple topic of your mother's loving eyes, your father's loving eyes, your baby's loving eyes. So you could write about something you see right in front of you. So if you're nursing your baby, you look down at your baby and you see the baby looking back at you. How does that make you feel? How does that loving gaze make you feel? And then you write the word eyes, baby's eyes, and then you write all those circles. That's the beginning of a poem, where you write about one topic and you associate, imagery and emotions to that object. So right now it's still in the pre-writing, what inspires you? So you find inspiration in your environment. Get inspired by your environment and those close to you. Inspiration for a great poem is all around you, even if you don't see it just yet. Think of every memory, situation, and moment as a possible topic that you'll start seeing poetry all around you. Or you can go for a walk. Head to your favorite park or spot in the city. Just take a walk through your neighborhood. Use the people you see and nature and buildings you pass as inspiration for a poem. Write about someone you care about. Think about someone who's really important to you, like a parent or a best friend. Recall a special moment you shared with them and use it to form a poem that shows that you care about them. Pick a memory you have strong feelings about. Close your eyes, clear your head, and see what memories come to the forefront of your mind. Pay attention to what emotions they bring up to you, positive or negative. And as you're feeling these emotions, write it down. Write down what emotions, what imagery comes to your mind. Pay attention, and probe into these emotions. Strong emotional moments make for beautiful, interesting poems. So if I say my baby's eyes, I would think innocence, affection, dependence, need, all around just baby's eyes, baby blue, and stuff like that. And then you can write down your affection for your baby, for instance. So find inspiration in your environment. Anything can be game for a poem as long as you can put a lot of emotion into it. So pick a specific theme or idea. You can start your poem by focusing on a specific theme or idea that you find fascinating, such as your lover's eyes, your baby's eyes, or even just the word love. Picking a specific theme or idea to focus on in the poem can give your poem a clear goal or objective. This can make it easier for you to narrow down what images and descriptions you are going to use in your poem. So in this example, you have the theme of love. Okay, so love, what do you associate with the word love? And so love is friendship, romance, family, grandma, and then the theme. What theme do you want to use? Is it going to be a broken heart? Is it going to be something happy? So for example, you may decide to write a poem around the theme of love and friendship. You may then think about specific moments in your life where you experience love and friendship, as well as how you would characterize love and friendship based on your relationship with others. Try to be specific when you choose a theme or idea, as this can help your poem feel less vague or unclear. So just like when you're writing when I was teaching English 101, and I'm always telling students, you've got to have a main idea. You got to have, when you write an essay, you have to have a thesis statement and 3 reasons. That the thesis statement has to have a what, which is the topic and the opinion, and then the reasons, which is why, the what and the why. And when you write a poem, the same thing. Your main idea, love, hate, disgust, any kind of strong emotion, and then associate. When you think of love, what do you think about? You think about your best friend, you think about your brother, your sister, your family members, your boyfriend, girlfriend, wife or husband, partner, or your children, your dog, puppies. So people associate love with so many things, and then write that in an outer circle. Then you have a beginning of a poem. And then after you have, say, romance, then you can have imagery of what that looks like. People kissing, people hugging, people reunited after like they've been separated a long time. Friendship, reliability, dependability. Like if you're in pain, that person's always there for you. That sort of thing. And so you can branch out, but make sure you pick a general theme like love or hate. And in week 5, we're going to study the poetry that talks about jealousy, envy, greed, love, hate, and betrayal and pain. Those are some of the emotions that we're going to be going over as we discuss poetry in the poetry unit, as we read the poetry and strong emotions from great poets. And for instance, in the Alfred Prufrock poem, in that one, Insecurity, in which Alfred Prufrock is a middle-aged man. He's bald, and he feels insecure and old because he thinks that he sits in a room, he's at a party, and he wants to find a wife. But he is so afraid that his bald spot will turn away all the girls. And so you have in the poem, in this poem, it's about fear, worry, and insecurity of a middle-aged man not able to find a wife because of his bald spot. So there you got the Alfred Prufrock poem. So think of a theme and then decide what to associate with that theme. So try to be specific when you choose a theme or idea, as this can help your poem feel less vague or unclear. For example, rather than choosing the general theme of loss, you may choose the more specific theme, such as loss of a child, or loss of a best friend, loss of a job. So here, you start out with love, and then you could write romantic love, for instance. The romantic love of my husband, the romantic love of my wife. So you can narrow it down, and then you would write what imagery, what emotions or images or events or memories does that idea or theme evoke for you. And that's the beginning of your poem. Genre. There are many different kinds of poetry, many different kinds of poetry forms that you can use. You can have a limerick, hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock struck one, and down he runs, hickory dickory dock. So here you have A, B, B, A. So A, B, A. So here you have you can write poems that rhyme with certain pattern, A, B, A, B, B, or A, B, A. So, and also, I didn't mention this, there's also a rhyming dictionary. So if you cannot think of what rhymes with dock, and you can't think of the word clock, there is a dictionary for that, okay? So these poets, I don't know about the ancient ones, but modern day poets actually use a rhyming dictionary. So I'll tell you about that later. So you can have a cinquan. A cinquan is 5 lines in which you have 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, 4 words, 1 word. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 in 5 lines. So choose a format that you like, or you can write a shape poem in which this is a car, and then you draw a car and then you write about a car, for instance. Or you have it in the shape of a heart and you write your poem in the shape of a heart. And believe it or not, there's software that actually does that for you, in which you can make word charts and stuff like that. Yeah, I've done that before. Haiku. Haiku means that you have 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. And then here you have 3 lines, 5, 7, 5. And it doesn't have to rhyme. The haiku started out with in Japan. And in Japan, it is Japanese poetry, where a haiku usually describes the beauty of nature. So after you choose your topic, like the theme, like love of a spouse, remember we talked about that, or eyes, the beauty of the eyes of your loved one or of your baby. Now that you have your theme of your baby's eyes, your mother's eyes, your husband's love, now you're going to choose which genre you want to write. Do you want to use a limerick? Do you want to use a cinquan? Do you want to use a haiku? Do you want to use a shape poem? Do you want to use a sonnet? There are so many. These are not the only genres. This is just an example. There's so many different genres you can choose from. So choose a specific, after you figure out what your theme or your main idea is going to be. Your next step is to choose a poetic form. Get your creative juices flowing by picking a form for your poem. There are many different poetic forms that you can use, from free verse to sonnet to rhyming couplet. In other words, your poem does not have to rhyme. Free verse means that your poem does not rhyme. So I believe this one's free verse. Whisper, you, dearest. None of these words rhyme. So this is an example of free verse. And free verse came about in the end of the 20th century. It's considered modern poetry, whereas traditional poetry, all kinds of rhyming schemes, such as A, B, A, B, B, A, and A, B, A, that sort of thing. So you may go to a poetic format that you find easy to use, such as free verse, or a form that you find more challenging, such as a sonnet. We're going to be studying Shakespeare's sonnet. Shakespeare's sonnet is written in the iambic pentameter, and when people speak English, we actually speak in the iambic pentameter. That means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. John went to the store. Okay, that's the iambic 1, 2. That's 5, I forgot what you call it, but 5 sounds that you emphasize as you stress. That's stress sounds as you speak. So choose one poetic form and stick to that structure so your poem feels cohesive to your reader. You may decide to try a poetic form that is short, such as the haiku, cinquan, or the shape poem. You could then play around with the poetic form and have fun with the challenges of a particular form. Try rearranging words to make your poem sound interesting. You may opt for a form that is more funny and playful, such as the limerick form. If you are trying to write a funny poem, or you may go for a more lyrical form like the sonnet or the ballad, or the rhyming couplet for a poem that is more dramatic and romantic. So I went over all the different genres in my genres of poetry video. So that's a different, I created a whole different video where I went over what a couplet is, what's a quatrain, what's a cinquain, what's a sonnet, what's a haiku. Okay, those are the ones that come off the top of my head because I just made that video. So I have that video, I gotta look that up. I named it Types of Poetry. Yeah, so if you look at my Types of Poetry video, I go over that. So first you have to free write, find a topic, a theme like love or my father's love, then hunt around for a simple or challenging poetic format you want to write. And so read examples of poetry, and that's what we're going to be doing in this class. In our poetry unit, we're going to be reading poems by Shakespeare, William Blake, just to name a couple. So we will be reading examples of poetry, and when you read examples of poetry, you get a better sense of what other poets are writing. You may look through examples of poetry. You may read poems written in the same poetic form you are interested in, or poems about themes or ideas that you find inspiring. You may also choose poems that are well known and considered classics to get a better sense of the genre. For example, now we're not going to be reading a lot of these, but you could read these poems outside of class. And most of these poems are found in the American Anthology of Poetry. So in this class, we're just going to cover a much smaller amount. You're going to compare and contrast two poems for your week 5 forum. And then in week 6, we're going to go over how poems and poetry or poets use rhyme and cadence, assonance, in order to add musical sounds to the English language, and that renders a poem easy to be put to music. So we're going to be doing more about poetry and sound in week 6, and so that's why it's really good to become a good poet, to read examples of poetry, to see. And Shakespeare, of course, he's the king of poetry. Walt Whitman is another one. Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson actually wrote her poems off of church hymns. So just knowing that alone, it helps you understand that how closely linked poetry is to music. And another way to understand, if you want to get to know poetry analysis even more, just take a look at your favorite song lyrics. Any song lyric on the radio or love song started out as a poem, and then the songwriter added a melody to it in order for it to become a song. So read examples of poetry and to understand the different structures to help you create your poem. Concrete imagery. So if you're going to use imagery in your poem, use concrete imagery. Avoid abstract imagery and go for concrete descriptions of people, places, and things in your poem. You should always try to describe something using all 5 senses: your sense of smell, taste, touch, sight, and sound. Using concrete imagery will immerse your reader in the world of your poem and make images come alive for them. For example, rather than trying to describe a feeling or image with abstract words, use concrete words instead. Rather than write, "I felt happy," you may use concrete imagery or concrete words to create a concrete image, such as, "My smile lit up the room like wildfire. Her eyes glowed like blue sapphires," instead of saying she has blue eyes. You see, that's really boring. If you just say she has blue eyes or she has brown eyes. But if you use simile, literary devices, and you evoke imagery, you want to paint a picture in your reader's mind. And you paint that picture by appealing to all 5 senses of the reader. Their sense of smell, taste, touch, sight, and sound. And in really good lyrical poetry, you want the reader to feel what you read. So if you're in love, you want the reader to feel that intensity of your love for the person that you're writing to. And Petrarch was in love with a blue-eyed, blonde-haired woman named Laura. And so Petrarch, he was Italian. I think it was in the middle age, 15th century. Okay, I'm bad with numbers, but he's famous for writing these love poems to this woman named Laura. And he said that her eyes were like the blue of the sky. And it's so lyrical, and that when you read it, you think, wow, she must have been really beautiful. But it's unrequited love. He was in love with her, she's not in love with him. That sort of thing. It didn't go both ways. And so you feel the pain and the longing and the yearning in Petrarch's poetry. And so anyway, getting back to poem. So use concrete imagery in order to get the reader to feel what you feel. And when you use concrete imagery, you would use literary devices. So include literary devices like metaphor and simile to add variety and depth to your poetry. Using these devices can make your poem stand out to your reader and allow you to paint a detailed picture for your reader. Try to use literary devices throughout your poem, varying them so you do not use only metaphors or only similes in your writing. And so a metaphor is when you liken one subject to another. If I'm Romeo, like in Romeo and Juliet, they were 2 young people in love. And Romeo went to Juliet's balcony at night and said, "Juliet, Juliet, you are the sun." In other words, Juliet is so beautiful, and her eyes and her beauty is like sunshine to Romeo. And so here you have a metaphor in which Romeo compares Juliet to the sun. So that's known as a metaphor. So this, in a metaphor, this device compares one thing to another in a surprising way. A metaphor is a great way to add unique imagery and create an interesting tone. Example, I was a bird on a wire trying not to look down. Okay, so that's a metaphor. And I think in trifles, metaphors are used as symbolism. For example, being a trapped, caged bird symbolizes being trapped inside the house and having no freedom. And so when you compare two things using a literary device, that gives your poetry more depth. So I was a bird on a wire. And that means I'm on the abyss. I feel so nervous, and that sort of thing, being in love. Simile. Simile compares two things using the words like and as. So that's the only difference between a simile and a metaphor. Metaphor, you compare two things, but you don't use the words like and as. And simile, you compare two things, but you use the words like and as. They might seem interchangeable, but both create, that is, simile and metaphor, but both metaphor and simile create a different flow and rhythm you can play with. So, for instance, she was as alone as a crow in a field, or my heart is like an empty stage. And here, then as soon as you say empty stage, your reader pictures a stage with nobody on it. It's deserted. So you feel the emptiness of the poet's heart. So that's simile. And when you use these literary devices, it's to help the reader paint a picture, image in their mind of your emotion. Personification. If you personify an object or an idea, you're describing an inanimate, you're giving human characteristics to an inanimate object. So you're describing an object by using human qualities or attributes. This can clear up abstract ideas or images that are hard to visualize. So if I say that the fog sits over the harbor, so the fog is an inanimate object of nature. So, water vapor. Water vapor, they don't have legs and can sit down. But the poet adds these human attributes so that in your mind you picture a fog person sitting down on top of the city and trapping the city with its fog, you see. And I can't remember the name of we are going to read that poem in our class. And that's one of the poems that you can write about for your reader response or your explication essay. I just can't think of who the poet is. So personification. So my love is like a tornado in a jar. So that's an example of personification. The fog sits over the harbor. Alliteration. Alliteration occurs when you use words in quick succession that begin with the same letter. So think tongue twister. Susie sat on the seashore with her seashells, or something like that. S. Or Lucy let her luck linger. La 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 la. And so when you use alliteration or assonance or consonants, I go over that in a different video where I go over different kinds of poetry devices. That makes the words sound musical, and it gives a musical quality or musical effect to your poem, and it gives a musical effect to the language. And that's why poetry sounds so beautiful, because the poet makes an extra effort to make the words sound musical. Hence the intense relationship between poetry and music. Write for the ear. Poetry is made to be read out loud, and you should write your poem with a focus on how it sounds on the page. Writing to the ear will allow you to play with the structure of your poem and your word choice. Notice how each line of your poem flows into one another, and placing one word next to another creates a certain sound. And so when you write poetry, you want your poem to flow naturally. You don't want it to be choppy. And so in this poem, you have voices screeching, fingers pointing, a cruel world made for strangers. Blame is crushing, guilt or is haunting, a prison that no one escapes. For example, you may notice how the word glow sounds compared to the word glitter. Glow has an ow sound which conjures up an image of warmth and softness to the reader. The word glitter is 2 syllables, glitter, and has a more t sound. This creates a sharper, more rhythmic sound for the reader, for the listener. So glitter meaning, so if this word sounds more rough to the ear, then you would think, you would think that the whatever it is colder and more cruel. And if the word sounds ow and it conjures up an image of warmth and softness, then that's how you would write, how your poem sounds conveys emotion to your reader. And also you could use sound words: screeching, pointing, barking, yelling. So you could use sound words also. That's called onomatopoeia. It's not in this particular. But when you use sound words, it also makes your, and Jabberwocky, I think, is one in which that's nonsense words. You could also use nonsense words, such as in Alice in Wonderland. Harry Potter uses the nonsense words in order to evoke a sense of fantasy. This is not of this world. It's a fantasy world. So hence using fantasy names, which I can't think of off the top of my head. There were 1,000 of them in Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and just to name a couple. Tolkien was really good at using fantasy. So if you're creating a new world, like in Jabberwocky, you might as well create new nonsense words. in order to give a sense to the reader. You make the reader feel like he's out of his box. That's what you do. And make the reader uncomfortable. So it makes the reader feel like she's somewhere else in fantasy. So write for the ear. Avoid cliches. Cliches are overused sentences that people have used a gazillion times. If you use cliches, then it makes you sound like you lack originality. You don't know how to come up with so if you want, you got to come up with your own descriptions. So busy as a bee, everybody says that. So any kind of a slang or cliche, you got to avoid that, okay, because that's not original. Avoid cliche. Your poetry will be much stronger if you avoid cliche, which are phrases that have become so familiar they have lost their meaning. So that means it's overused. Everybody uses it. Go for creative descriptions and images that you come up by yourself, so that your poem, so that you can surprise your reader and intrigue your reader with your writing. If you use cliches, you bore your reader. So if you feel a certain image or phrase is too familiar or sounds like a cliche, replace it with one of your own unique phrases, something that you make up that's unique to you. For example, you may notice you have used the cliche, "She was as busy as a bee," to describe a person in your poem. You may replace the cliche with a more unique phrase, such as, "Her hands were always occupied," or "She moved through the kitchen at a frantic pace." So you can come up with your own ways to avoid cliches. Once you finish writing your poem and you're in the revision, so now we've gone through pre-writing, where we want to think of the topic and come up with the main idea, in which we write about the baby's love or love. And then we actually write the poem, where we choose a haiku or singquan or some poetic format. And now we finished. So remember, the 3 stages of writing is pre-writing, writing, and now we're in rewriting. So now that you've finished writing your poem, now you've got to read the poem out loud, because poetry was always meant to be read out loud. So how do you polish your poem? So read it out loud and then see how it sounds. Notice how the words sound on the page. Pay attention to how each line of your poem flows to the next. Keep a pen close by so you can mark any lines or words that sound awkward or jumbled. You may also read the poem out loud to others, such as friends, family, or a partner. Have them respond to the poem on the initial listen, and notice if they seem confused or unclear about certain phrases or lines. And this also goes for if you write an essay. You also can have somebody else read your paper to someone else to see if your paper makes sense. Get feedback from others. You can also share your poem with other poets to get feedback from them and improve your poem. You may join a poetry writing group where you workshop your poems with other poets and work on your poetry together, or you may take a poetry writing class where you work with an instructor and other aspiring poets to improve your writing. You can then take the feedback you receive from your peers and use it in your revision of the poem. And so revise. So revision, just like revision is the last step in doing your essay, so you also revise the general structure. How does it sound? Does it have a good rhyming scheme? Does it sound musical? All of that stuff. And so once you've received feedback, whatever it is, then incorporate that feedback into your poem. So once you've received feedback on your poem, you should revise it until it is at its best. Use feedback from others to cut out any lines that feel confusing or unclear to others. Be willing to kill your darlings and not hold on to pretty lines just for the sake of including them in the poem. Make sure every line of the poem contributes to the overall goal, theme, or idea of the poem. You may go over the poem with a fine-tooth comb and remove any cliches or familiar phrases. And then then the very last step is you should make sure there are no spelling and grammar errors in the poem. And then you're ready to show your poem to the world. And this ends my my presentation on how to write a poem.